Good morning, ladies, gentlemen. How are you all? I was tempted this morning before coming here to drop by my office to print a copy of my presentation. And then I thought, how inappropriate. How inappropriate. So here I am, and thank you very much, members of the head table, Nigel, the leadership, governmental and institutional of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, representatives of government and other sponsors and other organizations, distinguished guests, all of you. Pleasure to be here with you all. And, collaboration is such an interesting thing. Some of it is deliberate. Some of it is serendipitous. It just kind of happens. So I was quite pleased when P.S. McKellar said that he was going to be 14 minutes of his 25. Because when I timed my presentation last night, it was not an hour and 15 minutes, but about an hour and 47 minutes long. So things work to the good. Now, you'll recognize as I go forward that that's my kind of humor. It's really not true. Okay, but really some thoughts on the whole issue of effective collaboration. And I want to say that where we are requires a certain kind of disruptive behavior. Creation begins with destruction. We really have to disturb and disrupt what we have if we are to get something new. And I thought I would be a little disruptive because the title of my presentation is The Art of Effective Collaboration. And I thought I would just be a little irreverent and rebellious and call it the heart of effective collaboration. Because we can understand that, yes, there is the hardware, there's the technology, and PS referred to all the technological stuff and the policy issues. But there is very much at the heart of this, what I could call from my place of the behavioral sciences, the software, which really is the heart, the minds, the attitudes of people towards what we are facing. But where are we? And I'll go through this as I share a couple of vignettes with you in terms of some perspectives on this issue around collaboration. Where are we as a people and as a region? We know the challenges. We have some ideas. We've been talking about them. We're clear on the concepts, and we know that there's a rationale, a reasoned basis for collaboration. We know what some of the dangers are and the risks of not collaborating and the costs, importantly, of that. But are things changing? And we ask ourselves, if not, why not? The truth is, a system maintains its stasis because it serves the people who are in the system. Things stay the way they are because in a perverse kind of way, people are getting something from it. And I reflect on one particular country in which I've worked and lived. And we have a licensing department, which has been known for years to have been a place of significant corruption. I can say that. And you ask yourself, if people know that and we espouse the fact that we don't like this corruption, how come for decades it stays the same way? And it stays that way because it serves the people who are in the system. The officers, the driving instructors, the touts, the people who can't read to do their registration or their examination and who want to get a license anyway. People are served by a system when they are in it, and that tends to maintain the stasis. So we may want to ask ourselves, how is the current system of ICT around the region? How is it serving us? Are we in a perverse way getting some benefit from it staying the way it is? And is that benefit individual benefit, territorial benefit, political benefit, or collective benefit? What are some of the hurdles that we face? There are some self-issues, of course. Issues of ego and turf and fear of losing control, and we know that is there, and people will always face that kind of thing. But there are also some relationship issues. The question of cultures, different ways of doing things, and maybe in all of that, when we think about relationship issues, notions of a lack of trust. We know that there are antagonisms across the region. Let's not be dishonest to ourselves about that. There are ways that we feel about one another and the things that we carry with us from our past. There are also power imbalances. Some people feel that they're bigger than other people. Some people feel they have more oil than others. Well, that's being recalibrated, isn't it? You know, and suddenly as that shift, you could feel a different kind of attitude and behaviors around the region. We have to face these things. We have to acknowledge them. And of course, there are some of the inter-organizational issues. Well, I have my space, I have my organization, I have some different places. And we can maintain what our space is because there's a logic and there's an existential reality that we exist because we are who we are. If we begin to collaborate, do we lose that? Do we get lost in the collective? Some other kinds of challenges that we face might be, as I say, some of the individual things, the letting go, the sense of loss. If I lose that ability to control this decision and to say that we did this, you know, how do I handle that? And what is our individual experience of letting go what was, not yet holding on to what will be, and really being that space, as I describe it, as being between the trapezes, where you're up in the air, your stomach is up in your throat, you're not holding on to anything, and you're wondering what's going to happen next. But we only move forward from the old trapeze if we are prepared to let go of it and experience that void in the middle before we hold on to something else that is new. We are, of course, there are the issues, of course, of character. I mean, who am I as a person? What do I stand for? Do I espouse collaboration, but I behave in a different kind of way? And do I stand for what I believe in? Do I say for what I believe in? There's a formula I introduced to people many years ago, and it says V equals R equals B. You say, what kind of formula is that? No, I'm not a mathematician. I absolutely abhor the thing. You know, in spite of the fact that I know that the square and the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square and the other two sides. I just had to learn that. What I learned was the English, not the mathematics. But when we think about that V equals R equals B, essentially what we're saying is that our values, what we believe in, must be consistent with our rhetoric, what we say. And our rhetoric must be consistent with our behavior. In other words, in common English, non-mathematical English, non-formulaic language, if you believe it, say it. If you say it, do it. And sometimes as we negotiate the space in collaboration in the ICT space, there are things we may believe and not say. There are things we believe and say something different, or we say something and then we do something that is quite different. And that's at the human interactive level. But at the organizational systemic level, there's also some issues we have to grapple with. When we talk about collaboration, on what? Are we collaborating in terms of our legal framework, our policy positions? You know, what are some of those things? What is the clarity? Collaboration is a nice, easy word to say. But what does it mean on the ground in terms of policy and perspective and what we articulate in our respective jurisdictions and as a collective around the region? It also means, as we have discovered in CARICOM, that collaboration creates an entire new layer of work. We work individually, but when we start to talk about collaboration, there's a whole slew of work, additional work, that is not individual, but that is that collaborative work that takes effort. Many of the people here, you have jobs. And collaboration really is a kind of piece of what you're being called upon to do. But as we know in organizations, while you lead an organization, the question of organizational transformation is a job in and of itself. It's huge, and it requires resourcing and time. The truth is, we are trying to change a large, complex system. That's a huge task. How do we wrap our arms around this thing? Because the truth is, action takes place within and between individuals. Someone picks up a telephone and someone offers to help. Someone decides on something and somebody else says yes or no. Someone concedes. Somebody stands in another person's place. Somebody has to take the time to listen and to understand as the conversations and the dialogue and the exchanges take place around the region. And those represent a host of individual decisions to act or to not act in concert with the principle of collaboration. What do we know? The system will change when people change. Relationships, feelings, exchanges, reciprocity. But what we also know is that people will change when the systemic architecture changes. When we begin to reconfigure the space in terms of policy, structures, roles, relationships, responsibilities, when we do that, behavior begins to change. If you doubt me, think about your friends, not you, who leave the Caribbean behaving in a particular way, land in North America, and suddenly begin to drive within the speed limit and stop at stop signs and line up when they want to go onto a bus. And you say, well, what happened to you? Well, the truth is, the architecture in that space is different. There are issues of enforcement, oversight, consequence management that take place. So the architecture changes and people start to behave differently. Now, when people start to behave differently, their attitudes come along. Suddenly we start to appreciate that when we're out there. And then we come back. We say, boy, this place is real disorganized. The same thing that we used to do. All right. So it is, in fact, a challenge of how do people make the individual changes, but also how do we begin to shift and reconfigure the regional architecture in terms of policy, legislation, and working relationships and operational issues. All that is happening in a region that is nuanced in terms of what's happening. Crime, social turmoil, dislocation, tensions, the stresses that people experience, the demands from multiple publics, and of course, increasing demands. Our populations are not as, I don't want to say docile, but they're not as accommodating as they used to be. People want more, they're seeing more, and they want more. There are the political demands, the dangers, and the expectations. Certainly in terms of the forcefulness of populations and their willingness to change political administrations. And there are, of course, the survival responses that go with that. There's a kind of scrutiny that has come to leaders that didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago. Long ago, when you said something about a prime minister or a governor, you said, boy, you can't say that. Boy. Well, now we can say anything about anybody in any space. No one is, quote unquote, safe. There are cameras, there are microphones, and there are platforms for disseminating our opinions. So that there's a kind of scrutiny, which of course puts the people who are being scrutinized in a much more sensitive and tenuous kind of situation. Rising demands for transparency. Of course, there's the intra-regional and inter-regional xenophobia. And of course, our history of memories and hurts and other things that have happened among us. So we face a challenge. What do we seek to address? And I'd want to say that one of the strands, one of the things we need to tackle is that we need to focus on what we can control. We can control ourselves. We cannot control others, but we may seek to influence them. And we may seek to influence the wider system. We have to be clear. We are not going to fix everything in one fell swoop. No one of us is going to be able to do it. So the issue of understanding what we can control and what we can influence and the extent of that influence those things become important considerations for us. Well, let's go home. Let's go home to a time when, if we say that all those things are bad, the economics, the social issues and so on, let's go home to a time when things were bad. When things were tough in our families, in our communities. And interestingly, counterintuitively, those were the times and the circumstances when we came together and when we shared even when we didn't have a whole lot. Parents shared with neighbors, not because they had a whole lot, but because they understood what was happening all around and recognized that one hand can't clap. Today I will give, today I will share. But that creates a space in which there is that reciprocity and sharing, so that as things continue to be difficult, other people are going to contribute to our collective survival. It's counterintuitive, but it worked for our parents and our grandparents. It can work for us. Because in the emerging world context, what do we have? We have the economic disruptions and slumps. We have the issue of China and their economy and its impact on the global. We have the Trump phenomenon. We have Brexit. We have rising xenophobia. We hear the stridency of comments on our social media, pressure on our social systems, and a lot of people, in a sense, hardening into very extreme positions. You're either right or left. You're either right or wrong. And in a sense, a kind of fluidity that used to exist no longer being as common as it used to be. Those challenges today give rise to a couple of things. A lot of emotional gut responses. So we get extreme and we respond. We speak differently and we listen differently, if we listen at all. Old fears emerge. And of course, we can see certainly in the North American context that in the context of a President Obama and the 8 years that he spent in office, you felt a certain kind of reaction, which has moved to a very extreme place in terms of, say, immigration policy and other things like that. So when things happen, some of those extreme responses resurface. Old assumptions are reinvigorated, whether accurate or not. But what we need to do is counterintuitive. The truth is, we come to today not as today, but we bring our past with us. My favorite, of course, is that every contact leaves a trace. And we have had our contacts. Our past includes our historical record. A time when a young man got on a ship in Spain, sailed west, landed on an island, got off the island and planted a flag in the ground and claimed the island in the name of the King and Queen of Spain. If that is not disrespectful, I don't know what is. Nobody is going to come into your house and claim your house in the name of a neighbor down the road. Well, maybe not. I hope not. But understand if it happened, and in a sense, that kind of disrespectful start to our modern record of history has echoed through the centuries. We have been extremely disrespectful. So leadership was about power and force, and might was right. And long after slavery and indentureship ended, it continued in families. Well, you do that because I am your father. Yeah, but daddy, listen, I am your father and I say so. End of story. Teachers say X and Y and that's it. What are we feeling now? A significant pushback against a lot of that. So that we, in a time when we had those kinds of experiences, we had direct experiences with other people, and even if we didn't, we heard stories of disrespect and mistrust and other kinds of things that did not promote a sense of collaboration. There are memories of previous generations. So in a Trinidad and Tobago, I was born and grew up in a place called Arima. And every now and then somebody will talk about the time back in the 40s when the Bajans came into a cinema in Arima and the Arimians beat them and chased them out. Hello. It's a story. It's an incident. But stories get told and retold and retold. And they become law, L-O-R-E, and legend. They become the basis for generations who did not directly experience something to have a perspective, cognitive and emotional, about other people and how we encounter one another. So a lot of that has to do with sometimes the mythology of the past. And these are stored as data, but they're stored very importantly as emotions. There are things that we feel about certain kinds of things. My mother was a African Tobagonian who married my father, whose father was English and his mother was from the south somewhere. And these two people, visibly different, went to live in this place called Arima. Now, the people who understand Arima back in the 1940s will understand issues of skin tone and acceptance. When you're black and you're from Tobago, you really don't have a place in Arima. So a husband and wife, visibly different, had some different kinds of experiences in a place like that. So their two boy children grew up with that. So my brother and I understand that. How do we negotiate that? To whom are we loyal? Our mother or our father? Or both? Or are we loyal to some space in the middle of collaboration and reciprocal relationships? And that's just one tiny example of what we all have been through in some way, shape, or form. It happens at the interpersonal level. It happens between towns and cities. It happens between territories and across the region. And those stories remain. There's residue. And of course, that residue gives rise to emotional triggers. When we hear a phrase, when we see something, when we notice something, it doesn't take very long for an emotional response to jump in. So the neuroscience of things, of interaction, says that yes, these things are stored in this place called, as we say in emotional intelligence, in the amygdala, this seat of emotions. Those memories are there. And memories trigger things. And we start to feel, and then we start to behave, and we start to speak in certain kinds of ways. And of course, we respond. I want to take your mind back to the World Cup when France was playing Italy. The captain of the French team was Zinedine Zidane, of North African roots and heritage. Somebody in the Italian side kept needling him about his mother and his sister. This is the captain of the French team. Final of the World Cup. Playing for everything. Logic says, stay calm, stay cool, play your game. And the person said it one more time. But red card, off. And your team is playing one man short. Understand the power of emotions in spite of the logic of collaboration. In spite of the logic of playing for all the big money, in spite of the logic of what we ought to do, emotions have a powerful place in terms of how we respond to things and how we behave. Let me introduce to you a concept of something that we call the awareness wheel, which is a kind of cycle that we go through. And in any interaction, the first phase is where we do some sensing. In other words, we pick up information. As we pick up that information, the thinking and the feeling start to play games. We interpret it, we start to feel a certain way, we may reinterpret it, and then we want to do something and we actually do something else. And that's a constant cycle that goes on. The truth is that even the wanting and the doing, the thinking and the feeling are flawed. Because we must recognize that there's no point in any interaction where we have all the information. When we meet to discuss ICT issues and we hear something and we begin to react, we don't have all the information. How many yellow objects, real question, how many yellow objects are there in this room? 104. Close. Now, notice something. Were you aware of yellow objects when you came into the room? And the answer is no. All right? But when your mind is addressed and pointed to it, we'll be, oh, look, there's that, there's that, there's that. And I'm saying that in our interactions, as we begin to engage with one another, we're going to come to conclusions. We will have thoughts. We will make assumptions. But we are making those assumptions on the basis of incomplete information. Collaboration requires a kind of pausing and asking ourselves, what might I be missing? What else do I need to know about my colleague from another place? What else is happening with them? What else might be influencing what is going on in this interaction? Because if we don't, we of course head down the road of our thinking and feeling in a way that is flawed because we're operating on the basis of incomplete information. Now, we will never have all the information. But let's at least increase the little percentage. If we could go from 20% to 35%, we're in a slightly better place. And sometimes you'll recognize that you meet someone, you have a perception of them, you begin to interact, you meet people from another place, and you have some perceptions and you begin to interact. And then when you find out some more about their story, when you understand their journey, there's a kind of deeper awareness and appreciation of the person. Okay, now I understand why they're saying and doing what they're doing. I still don't like it. I still may not approve of it. But the relationship changes because now I understand. We have a basis then for discussion. And in terms of the art of collaboration, sometimes we need to pause. We may rush to the technology and the policy issues. But who is that person? What is their history? What is their journey to politics and to decision making? What else are they bringing with them that I need to understand? And if I did, I might engage with them a little differently. The other piece around this issue of the awareness wheel is that we have to ask ourselves, what are our triggers? Because there are some things that are going to get to us. There's a particular word or phrase. There's something that somebody will say that is going to rile me and put me on a different kind of trajectory. What is that? What are the things that are likely to upset me? Because I too, not just this other person, I too come to the current dialogue and conversation with my own history. And there are things that are likely to surface as I engage with others. We have as well at that point to recognize what our emotions are. You know, sometimes if you look at someone and people get angry sometimes in situations, but I like to refer, and we may want to consider, that anger is a secondary emotion. When you give somebody a joke, when you tease someone and they get angry, what happened before they got angry? What did they feel? They might have felt ashamed. They might have felt embarrassed. They might have felt hurt. And soon after that hurt, they managed the hurt by overtly expressing anger or aggression. So sometimes we want to recognize that when we say things, there are some other kinds of emotions that people experience. People feel put down. They feel disenfranchised. They feel left out. They feel isolated. They feel a number of things, and then they begin to sulk and to pout and to quarrel and to complain, and we treat with that. And you know, in these days we talk about we have to do anger management. Well, we need to do hurt management. We need to do exclusion management. We need to do disappointment management, because the anger follows these kinds of primary things. And when we in that engagement, what are we feeling? The other issue is around emotions, the artistry of language. If you look at someone who's really upset, but has a limited vocabulary, there's a way that they respond. You see me look, if I look, what's happening with them? Sometimes they really don't have the tools, the linguistic tools, to express what they are feeling. So it comes up, it doesn't come out in words, but it's going to come out. So it comes out when I slam the desk and I storm out of the meeting. Why? Because I may not have been able to express what my concern, what my hurt, what my disappointment, what my whatever. So we also have to look at our ability in collaborative situations to be able, one, to recognize what we are feeling, but also to be able to express what we are feeling. Listen, guys, you know, when you all talk about our program in that kind of way, I feel disappointed. I'm a little irritated by that. We need to be able to have those conversations. If we don't, if I don't know that you are feeling a little irritated or embarrassed or put out by what we just said about the program that you have and what you did last year with sourcing your IT, facility, if I don't know what you're feeling, I'm not able to address it. And I might just say, well, okay, let's move on. Anybody else? Anything? No? Okay. And we move on. But we move on with issues unresolved. This is not hard science. This is emotional science. This is psychological science. This is behavioral science. Things that we need to be able to manage about ourselves and to recognize about other people. The issue, of course, as we go through is that sometimes our emotions and our memories bring us to a place of a kind of logic. But logic is not always truth. We can arrive at a logical conclusion that is flawed. And I tell this story, and some of you all may have heard it, about my favorite elevator experience. This is all contrived, of course. I made this up. I didn't really have one of those. But imagine yourself going to an office and you see a panel on the wall as you walk into the lobby. You press a button and a little light comes on. A few seconds later, a door opens and there's a box in front of you. You step in. Inside the box, there's a panel with numbers and knobs. You press 5, a little light comes on, the door closes, the box begins to move, and voila. When it stops and opens, you're on the 5th floor. This is almost magical. And this happens week after week as I go to a building and I use the elevator. One week I go, I start the process, I go in, press 5, the box begins to move, there's a loud thud, it shudders, it stops and does not open. 45 minutes later, soaking wet, they get me out of the stuck elevator. Of course, I head home. The next week, I come back to that building to do business. What do? Now I head for the stairs. Okay? Now, that is absolutely logical, but it's wrong. Now, on the basis of an experience, my assumption about this box, this elevator, has changed. My experience has changed that. So, in my logical head, I am going to take the stairs. But the truth is, after the elevator was stuck, they recalibrated the timing, they checked the cables, they greased all the bearings, and the elevator is actually working better this week than it was working in the weeks before it got stuck. You see? So my emotion says, no way, because of this experience, and I had, and it's a kind of logic, but it's flawed logic. As we engage with one another around the region, how do we question some of our assumptions about people? Because our assumptions feel logical to us, but are they rooted in fact? I know how the people is. They always do that. Up to last year, they did so and so. So you don't know that? And we have this narrative that leads us to a place that is logical, but just, as my friend of mine would say, wrong like a O. That's another kind of wrong. Okay. But what does that have to do with us and ICT? What is some of our Caribbean mythology? What are some of the stories that we tell about one another? And we do tell stories about one another. Sometimes we're bold enough to share the stories with the people about whom we're telling this story, but most times we don't. What have we heard other people say about others? The stories that we listen to and laugh at. The memories that we share about other people. What have we experienced as we encounter people across the region? Things that have wounded us in some kind of way. Things that have excited us and animated us. What are some of those stories? And when we think about those experiences, what are the emotions we feel? What are the conclusions that we've come to? What are the assumptions that we are making as we go into our next collaborative meeting on the issue of ICT? Because we take those things with us. So we're suggesting, in terms of the art of collaboration, think about that awareness wheel. And at what point do we intervene as that wheel is constantly spinning? Do I stop and say, listen, do I have all the information? And that's first sensing. What else do I need to know? Is there something I need to validate and check about this thing? Do I need to intervene in that wheel at the thinking? But what am I thinking? Can I think something else? You know, I share this story. Sometimes you come into a room, going to do a training session, and as you walk in, you're hearing the room humming from outside, And as you walk in and people see you, they kind of look at one another, and then they put their heads down and the room goes silent. What do I do as a facilitator? What do I think? These people, they really don't want me here. Now, if that is my thought, something happens to me emotionally. I think I really want to be here with these people. Look, let me just set up and get through this thing. Yes. On the other hand, if I interpreted that bit of information differently, these people look as though they're ready to start. My feelings are different. My engagement with the group is different. So when we have control over our thoughts, how can I interpret what I see or hear from my colleagues around the region? And the next question, how else might I interpret it? What else might that mean? Is there something else that is happening here? Is there information that I need to get so I can understand more fully what is going on? And if we take the time up front, then our thinking and our feeling patterns begin to change. What we want to do and what we do also changes. So we have to reflect as well and be aware of what our potential triggers are. What is likely to set me off? What are some of the words that really hurt me, that when I hear them, it riles me a bit? What other interpretations might there be of a situation? I want you to picture and imagine, and we see it every now and then on our weather channels and our news channels around weather time, a satellite view of a hurricane. And we see the swirl, we see the eye, and it's a well-formed eye, and it's coming towards the Caribbean. And I want you to imagine that picture, satellite picture of a hurricane, and look at it through the eyes of a homeowner in the Caribbean. That is oh my God. But look at it through the eyes of the owner of a chain of building and hardware supply stores. Oh my God. Look at it through the eyes of the CEO of a general insurance company. Look at it through the eyes of a PhD climatology and meteorology student. Data, research. What is the truth? Well, we all have our truth. And the challenge is when we begin to sit and talk about the hurricane, how can we collaborate about what this thing is? The dangers it represents, the opportunities and how we might handle that. How do we prepare for it financially and otherwise? And how do we begin to understand this? And the conversation becomes not 4 different conversations, but one conversation about this fact, this reality. And there are some facts and realities that face us as a Caribbean when it comes to ICT. What is that conversation that we need to have? So what are some of the individual issues as we come to what is the key for us? And we say this is not so much a head challenge as much as a heart challenge. I'm going to share some things with you about the heart. It says the heart is where life ends. It is where energy is felt. It is the place from which life-giving oxygen is pumped. Think about the heart. Physically, your heart is what keeps your body alive. It pumps blood through almost 100,000 miles of arteries, veins, and capillaries. It brings life-giving nutrients to every cell and fiber of your being. What is at the heart? What is in the heart of a leader facing the collaboration challenge? Allow me to quote from a couple writings of sacred scriptures. The book of Matthew. That's where I will go. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A good man out of the treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. What is this thing about the heart? And the question is, as leaders, what's in our heart as we come to the conversation around collaboration? possibility into every person and every project. Possibility is what keeps your organization and the process of collaboration alive. What are we bringing? What are we pumping into our organizations? What do they see and feel from us? It matters whether your heart is open to collaboration or closed to it. We know the mouths and the minds may be open, but what is in the heart? As we come into a collaborative dialogue, are we focusing on the past and what has been done to me, what I may have lost, what I may have regretted? Or is your heart in the future, around the future of possibility? Sometimes we have to be, as we say, courageous. For the French students in the room, they still do French in school? You know, the word for heart in French is cœur. We have to have courage. We have to have a heart for this thing. It's the technical information, but really as we engage, what is our heart? Mark Miller, in The Heart of Leadership, says, when faced with a challenging or difficult situation, the best leaders most often respond with courage. Less mature leaders or non-leaders often choose another path, a path of less risk, less conflict, and less personal discomfort. When faced with a challenging or difficult situation, best leaders most often respond with courage. They respond with their heart. So we have to manage ourselves coming into this. And the issue of self-awareness is key, and self-management. What's going to trigger me? How do I manage myself in this thing? What's happening with my colleagues around the table? What am I seeing? Am I listening? Am I tuning in to what's going on with them? Do I recognize when someone's voice tone may change, where their body, their posture may change a little? And do I read what might be happening inside of them based on some external cue? Am I sensitive to that? Am I focused on that? Am I prepared as an individual to table some of my unease, some of my concerns, some of my irritability, some of my hurt, some of my vulnerability? Am I prepared to place that on the table and say, listen, guys, I am really scared about this thing. This is a major risk for me. It's the only way that your colleague is going to be able to help you to manage the unease and manage the risk. But we have to be prepared to put it on the table. We have to have, as we come to this, an issue coming from the heart, the issue of passion. Excuse me, how am I doing on time? I kind of waxing one, going into RLPC. You know? I don't, while I'm in the middle of this, to see any sign, I say 2 minutes. You know? All right. And I want to take our collective minds and hearts back to a time of Caribbean courage. Late colonial era, the British Empire was going through its throes of being dismantled. So we know that in the 1930s and so on, we had our labor issues around the Caribbean, and that the whole question of, labor unions standing up, stepping up, and speaking up against colonial powers. But that was not an isolated thing, because across the world, the British Empire, the empire on which the sun never set, some of you may remember, I do, that around that empire, things were beginning to be reconfigured. So by 1947, India got its independence. 1959, it was Ghana. And that movement continued over the next couple decades. But that was not in isolation. Because in North America, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. Across our region, there was the issue of federation and then segueing into independence. By the early 60s, even in America, massive protests against the war in Vietnam. The anti-apartheid movement was getting stronger and stronger. In other words, the world was in a time of foment. Things were changing, and a whole mass of populations across the world were stepping up, they were standing up, they were speaking up. by the late 50s, early 60s, we had our first non-white cricket captain. So the days of the Stallmeyers and the Alan Rays and so on, those days were receding. And we had a Frank Worrell, and then we moved into a couple other captains. But around the region, something else was happening. There was the rise of Rastafarianism. There was the issue of independence and a kind of beat-your-chest pride that was just pervading the region. And people were starting to feel, I was part of the independence generation. 1962, I was feeling good about who we could be and what we could be. Yes, you know, and you know, by the 1970s, there was a band of men across this region who was starting to beat the world at cricket. So from the mid-70s up into the mid-90s, this band of young men were out there. And I tell people, when Vivian Richards and Gordon Greenidge walked out into Lord's and they looked around, well, they didn't use to walk. Viv used to swagger. He used to stride. And he looked around. And he hit the first 6. Each run in those 6 runs for 100 years of oppression. That was politics. Vivian used to wear his wristband, the ice green and gold. That was not bling. That was politics. It was a set of people who came out of an era that generated in them a kind of pride and passion. So when this English captain unfortunately made the comment about we'll make them grovel, you know, oh yes, of South African roots, we will make them grovel. He didn't know what he did. Listen, there was a kind of thing that team had, a kind of passion and a power, and they may not have recognized where it came from. Well, they were born in the late 50s and in the 60s, and as little children, they were imbibing the spirit of the region. The federation, the independence, yes, we can. They sucked that thing into themselves. And in some way, they may not even have known where some of that pride came from. They came to recognize it later on and the value that they had. But they came up at a time when that passion was real. So there is what they call it now, a fast forward button. They have that in modern ICT. So let's press fast forward on the cassette player. You know, so, but when we go forward, when our players today, are they any less talented? And the answer is no. They have the same basic talent. Question: where is the passion, the fire, the pride, and the heart? What they wear on their wrists and on their neck is not a political statement. That is bling. And the issue is for us. At that time, there was something that brought our region together. There was something that we were fighting against, something that we were fighting for, that generated that spirit of passion and pride. In terms of cricket, contracts, IPL, deals, individual. Was our story as ICT leaders? Are we echoing and mimicking what our cricketers do? It's a question we have to ask ourselves. And how do we discover? How do we identify? How do we galvanize the issue that was that post-colonial needing to stand up and speak up and be as a people? What is it that we have to galvanize that will bring us to the place where we say, listen, we must bring who we are to the world. And to do that, we must collaborate in the way that our cricket team did it between 1975 and 1995. We have to find a way to get there. Martin Luther King says that human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Passionate concerns. Allow me in closing to talk a little bit about passion. Because passion is not just about excitement and drive and energy. I had a terrible habit with my children. They called it terrible. I thought I was being a kind father. Every time they came, Daddy, what's the meaning of so-and-so word? One answer. Bring the dictionary. Oh God, Daddy, I'm tired. No more Latin and Greek. Now just tell me, I want to put it in a sentence. Bring the dictionary. You have to understand where a word comes from and what it means. And I was doing some work on passion. And I went to the dictionary and discovered that passion is from the Latin word passio, which does not mean excitement and energy and drive and enthusiasm and motivation or anything like that. Passio means suffering and endurance, as in the passion of Christ. So be careful what you ask for if you want passion for this thing. Maybe you already have it, you already have the suffering. And the point is, there are two sides to the passion coin. There is the energy, there is the drive, there is the enthusiasm, there is the excitement that we come, okay, so we had this thing in Trinidad, but we're feeling really good about it. All it takes is one stupid email, one post on social media, one person doing something disruptive, and that bubble bursts. What keeps us going? What keeps us going is the other side of the passion coin. That what we are working on is so noble, so important, so significant, so groundbreaking and frame-changing that even when we hit the wall, we suffer, we endure, and we keep going. We have to keep going. We cannot depend just on the excitement. It must be the meaningfulness and the purposefulness and the meaning of what we are doing. Understanding that what we are doing is great work. It is our work. It's the work of our people for generations. People still talk about that team back then. People who never saw the team talk about that with pride. What is the pride that future generations will bring to a conversation about ICT and the work that was done in 2020? Thank you very much.